والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت عليم الحكيم. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. فقد نوينا التعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير ونفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على خير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah, in our discussions on knowledge and wisdom by Imam Abdullah bin Alwi al-Haddad, who is commonly known, and we have to remind ourselves of this, as Qutb al-Da'wa wal-Irshad, that he is the axis or the pillar of calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and guiding the creation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what that really entails is that his method and his vast understanding of the prophetic way of calling is very effective and has over the centuries been the catalyst by which thousands and hundreds of thousands of people have entered Islam or have reconnected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or have changed their lives and turned back to Allah. And we have and by understanding this, then the second step would be to open up and allow ourselves to be transformed by this call, because these advices are timeless. He is not just speaking to the people of his time, right? Because the intentions of the righteous and the saints and the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surpass their time period. They speak to centuries, they speak to many different generations beyond their own life, because that's part of their intention when they write. And this is one of the reasons why we have what they call qubulun fil ard, that Allah places for these great people, because of the sincerity of their intentions, Allah places for them an acceptance in the land, that their books are widely accepted, that their books, since the time they wrote them all the way until the Day of Judgment, are continuously read in different languages and constantly in different gatherings. And we see this throughout the tradition. From the early onset of Islamic scholarship, we see these types of works, like the Sahih al-Bukhari, like the Riyadh al-Salihin of Imam Nawawi. We see like the Ihya Ulumuddin of Imam al-Ghazali alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala. We see Majma' al-Ahbab, we see Qutun Qulub, these great works, and amongst them are the works of Imam Haddad. His entire series of books have been translated and served in many different languages and spread, and they're being read at this moment in Southeast Asia. They're being read at this moment in Germany. They're being read at this moment in the UK. They're being read at this moment in Australia, and even in places like France. And these are the books that have penetrated even those places where Islam is very few, right? Where Islam is the minority. Right, so today, which kind of branches off this idea of qubul fil ard, that this acceptance that Allah places for the people in the land, this acceptance that Allah places in the hearts of the people for these great works and these great scholars, right? That the idea of what's called rectitude or istiqamah, steadfastness or perseverance, right, in the religion. We commonly misunderstand piety as being a person who does a lot of good deeds. That if you were to ask 100 Muslims, just the everyday Muslim at the masjid or at the college, at the MSA, and you were to ask them, what is your definition of piety, right? Much of the answer is going to be based on, right, a quantity of worship. Many times it's on the basis of a quantity of worship. Right? So a person who gives a lot of charity, a person who fasts a lot, a person who does a lot of volunteer prayer, a person who does a lot of dhikr, right? A person who reads a lot of Quran, that these are aspects of piety. Right? However, the prophetic tradition doesn't see it that way. Right? And we see that the Prophet ﷺ, when advising his companions, right, he gave very simple advice. He taught them, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the companions came to him, as Imam Haddad mentions, and asked him, tell me one thing that I can do, because there's so much advice out there, there's so many things that I hear it's almost overwhelming, so just tell me one thing that I can do and I'll hold on to it, that I don't have to ask anyone else after that. Right? He said, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ. Right? Say that I believe in Allah, and then be steadfast, and then persevere on that reality, and then have rectitude, right, istiqamah in that reality. So Imam Haddad alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala wa nafa'ana bihi, may Allah benefit us by him, right, he talks about this idea of istiqamah. And the word for istiqamah is the same word for the straight path that we use, the mustaqim, sirat al-mustaqim, the path that is straight. If you break it down, the path that is straight. And this istiqamah has the meaning of, right, being straight, being direct, having upright, being steadfast, not giving up. It comes from the root word of qiyam, to stand, right, and to persevere for something. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet ﷺ tells us, right, what he seeks from his servant is not necessarily quantity. It is not necessarily quantity. Right? And one may argue that it's not at all, right, on the basis of quantity. Quantity is just, right, what they call wasfun arid. It's just a secondary consideration. It's not what's sought in and of itself. Rather, the Prophet ﷺ told us that أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْقَلْ, that the most beloved action to Allah is that which is continuous, even if it's little. And this may break the paradigm of many people who understand piety to be doing a lot of good things, a lot of good works. Right? So if we take this understanding that the Prophet ﷺ is giving, that Allah loves the one page of Quran a day, right, exponential amount of times more than the person who reads the entire Quran in one day and doesn't touch it for the next year. Right? The one who prays 2 rakats of the prayer of gratitude before sleeping every single night is more beloved to Allah than a person who wakes up one night, prays 20 rakats of tahajjud, and never wakes up again after that, right, for tahajjud. Right? So the person who has a small amount of good deeds, but it's continuous and there's quality in it, right, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that. Right? And the idea that Allah loves it means that Allah will accept it, and that action will have its transformative effect on the heart of that person and draw them toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even more. Whereas the night of reading the entire Quran, doing one khatam of Quran in 8 hours, right, is the reward? Most definitely. Right? Most definitely a person will get the reward. But will it have that ultimate transformative effect on the heart? Or is that just another extension of the nafs? Right? Because the nafs, the ego, or the lower baseless desires of the human, the base desires of the human, it inclines to all extremes, wherever it may find it. Right? And it doesn't have to only be extreme bad. Right? So one of the tricks of the shaitan is that if you overcome his call to you to not do the good deed, right, then he will settle with a secondary, that either he will cause you to rush that good deed, so the quality is gone, or he'll get you to show off in that good deed, so he'll mess with your intentions, right? Or he'll get you to do so much of that good deed in one moment and one instance that you burn out and you never do it again. Okay, and all of these are, we can see them in our own lives. We can see those instances of our life where we did that, where we succumbed to a type of extremism, right, in worship. Whereas the Sahaba, they were very wary of taking on any new act of worship or increasing an act of worship that they could not do constantly. That when they took it on, they committed to it till death. And we see many a hadith of this. One of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, he really loved to fast. So the Prophet ﷺ found out that he was fasting continuously without breaking his fast at all. And this is prohibited by the Prophet ﷺ, that a person to fast days on end without any iftar whatsoever, not even a drink of water or a date or anything, right, that is prohibited. The Prophet ﷺ did it himself, but that was amongst his special qualities that Allah has distinguished him from others with. And the companions, they said, Ya Rasulullah, you fast continuously. He said, Lastu kahayatikum, I am not like you. Abitu inda Rabbi yut'imuni wa yasqin. I spend my nights with my Lord and He feeds me and gives me drink. So there was a spiritual strength that allowed him to continue. He wasn't, so he alone has that ruling. So everyone else, they have to have pauses in between. So this man came to the Prophet, and the Prophet said that it was sufficient for you to fast 3 days a month. 3 days out of the month is good enough for you. So the man, he said, Ya Rasulullah, I can do more than that. So he kind of insisted. So the Prophet said, okay, then do Mondays and Thursdays. Okay. The man said, I can do more than that. He said, okay, then do, and he increased it a bit. And he said, I can do more than that. And then he increased it and increased it until he got to what's called the Sawm Dawood, right? The fasting of Dawood alayhi salam, which the Prophet said is the most beloved fast to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is you fast one day, you don't fast the next. You fast one day, then you don't fast the next. So every other day you're fasting. It's the hardest on the nafs, right? Because there's no routine, you don't get used to it, you don't, right? So this is the most beloved, but you do give your body your rights. So there's a balance there, right? It's not every single day, it's every other day. So there's a portion for your body and a portion for your soul. So the man, he took the permission of the Prophet ﷺ, and he did ask, Prophet, I could do more. He said, there is nothing better than that. You can't do more than that. You can't deem that which is better, that which is more than the sunnah to be better just because of quantity. If it is the sunnah, it is better no matter what the number it is. Right? So the man who narrates this hadith, the questioner, the one who said, I can do more, right? He started to fast every other day, and he narrates in the end of the hadith, and this hadith is in Riyadh al-Salihin of Imam Nawawi, the Gardens of the Righteous. He says that I wish I had taken the concession of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Now, why did he say that? Why did he say that I wish I had taken the permission to only fast 3 days or once or twice a week, or the other levels before the highest level? He said, the reason why he said that is because at the time of him narrating that hadith, he had become an old man. He had been elderly in age, and he still was fasting every other day. That means from the time that he asked the Prophet ﷺ, right, from that time all the way till he became elderly, such that his fasting was hard for him, right? All that time he never left it, the entire time, right? So we see that in the lives of the Sahaba, right, as well as the Prophet ﷺ, obviously as being the leader of and the role model of the Sahaba, that they were very wary to take on the responsibility of a deed unless they were certain that they could continuously do it with steadfastness until they died. Right? Many would suffice with very little of each type of good deed, and then as they progressed, they would increase that number. Right? So they would have a certain portion of Quran daily, and then once that became second nature to them because of their steadfastness on that, then they would increase it, right, to a higher level. But not a lot, but they would increase it slightly. Right? And then they would continue to do that until that became second nature, and then they would increase it. Right? So, right, you see that a Sahabi who is, right, a 20-year-old Sahabi, right, that the amount of worship that he was doing at 20, right, and the amount of worship that he was doing at 60, right, you can see the huge progression, right? And we can see this today in the great examples that are there amongst the awliya of Allah, the righteous scholars and the righteous servants of Allah. That's, right, there are people, right, in our times right now that read at least 10 juz of Quran every single day without any fail whatsoever. Right? There are people who do thousands of different adhkar every single day. There are people who give a certain amount of charity every single day. There are people who haven't missed a salat in congregation for the past 40, 50 years. Right? There are people who haven't missed the tahajjud prayer for even, right, since they were mature. They're still alive to today. But when we look at them, right, and we are stirred up with this desire and this yearning to try to be like them and emulate them, which is part of the purpose of taking these people as examples, that we can't try to jump to where they are now, because they didn't jump to where they are now. Right? They started small, and they worked their way up. So, like our teacher, I think he's early or mid 50s now, right? So, right, what he is doing now is what he has been increasing up to since he was a very young kid, a very young child. Right, so Imam Haddad alayhi rahmatullah, he opens the chapter by saying that rectitude or uprightness, istiqamah, you can translate it as steadfastness, on the straight path, the even road, right, leading to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is void of crookedness and deviation, is most difficult, nearly unattainable, save for the prophets, right, who are infallible, they don't make any, right, sins, right, and for the great people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the siddiqeen, the emphatically truthful among the well-guarded saints of Allah. Right, so those closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are people of istiqamah, people of steadfastness. Right, now, as a person draws nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, throughout history we have examples where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed to happen at their hands, right, things that are contrary to the norm that we are accustomed to in our day-to-day lives. These are called karamats. They're a type of miracle. Right? And we see this in the lives of the Sahaba. We see this even in the characters mentioned in the Quran, right? The figures mentioned in the Quran who are not prophets. Right? We have like the likes, right? Even though there is a khilaf between the scholars of whether Khidr was a prophet or not, or whether Dhul Qarnayn is a prophet or not. Right? Right? But the most famous opinion is that they weren't, that they were just righteous servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Even though the difference of opinion is valid. Right? But, right, many things happened at their hands that are not normal. Right? You can't, right, to travel from the east to the west, right, to build, right, to do all of these amazing things, right, to sleep for 309 years, right, to have a child without any father. Right? All of these things are miracles. Right? These are miracles. These are, right, what they call kharqul ada. They're breaks in the norm, and that's what a miracle is. It's a break in the norm. Right? If you want to go into great detail, there's actually five types of miracles. Right? 5 types of, right, khawariq, things that break the norm. Right? If it happens at the hand of a person claiming prophethood, right, and it happens exactly the way that they intended it to happen, then that is called a mu'jizah, a miracle. If it happens at the hand of a person of istiqamah, a person of uprightness and steadfast righteousness and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's called a karama. And the word karama, right, it means an ennobling from Allah, it's an honoring from Allah. Right? Many of the early Muslims, like Imam Abu Hanifa, right, they had, right, Allah blessed them with types of unveilings that they would be able to see, right, with the eye of the soul, right, that which no one else could see. Right? So Imam Abu Hanifa has recorded that that when a person would make wudu next to him, he could see the specific sins that would fall off in the drops of the water. And he asked Allah to take it away from him, because he didn't want to see people's faults, but he could see, okay, lying, backbiting, zina, khamar, right? He could see the faults of people just dripping in there. Obviously this is a seeing of the soul, not of the body, of the eyes. Right? There are many of the Sahaba, they experienced things like this. Right? Sayyidina Umar calling to Sariya, another Sahabi who he sent to Iraq in a battle, he called to Iraq, right, from Medina, from the pulpit, right, and say that, and everyone during the Jummah khutbah was, what is Umar doing? Ya Sari al-Jabal, Ya Sari al-Jabal, in the middle of a khutbah. Everyone is sitting there like, what is he doing? But Sayyidina Ali was just silent. He knew exactly what was going on. His level was, right? So, and Sariya heard him, right? And they came back 3 days later and said, we heard you. Right? You told us to look at the mountain because people are attacking from behind. And these are authentic stories. Imam al-Laqani says, فَاثْبِتًا لِأَوْلِيَا كَرَامَةً وَمَنْ نَفَاهَا فَانْبَذًا كَلَامًا. Right? As we affirm for the closest servants of Allah, the elect slaves of Allah, right, these ennobling miracles, these karamat, right? And whoever rejects them, then reject their statements. And that's the position of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and it's tried and tested all throughout, right, all throughout history. Right? And in reality, none of this should be far-fetched for anyone who believes in the creator of the heavens and the earth. Allah created the heavens and the earth. He could do that for His slave if He wishes. He can do whatever He wishes for His slaves. Right? But all of that is just to preface one statement. Right? Many of the early Muslims and the righteous, they would have a statement, it's, right, that al-istiqama ni'mal karama, that the greatest miracle that Allah could give at anyone's hands, right, is istiqama, steadfastness. Right? And really looking at a person and witnessing this steadfastness, right, it is as if you're witnessing, right, a miracle. It is as if you're witnessing a miracle. To see a person day in and day out, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of how tired they are, regardless of how much responsibility they are, regardless of whether they're home or whether they're traveling, whether they're healthy, whether they're sick, regardless of whatever, they never lost their patience for 40, 50, 60 years straight. Never, not for a single moment. It's a miracle. It is a miracle for the human to do that, right? That day in and day out, regardless of the circumstances, right, they never miss their tahajjud prayer, ever. Right? Day in and day out, regardless of anything, that they pray 45 minutes of ishraq every single day, without fail. Right? I've seen these types of people, right, come from, I'll just give the exact details, fly from Jordan to Oman, which is the neighboring country to the city of the author here in Yemen, right? And then drive 16 hours from Oman, from Salada airport, all the way to the madrasa. Right? Get to the madrasa, and then immediately they have to they pray Fajr. Right? There's tahajjud prayer, then they pray the Fajr prayer, then after the Fajr, they have about an hour of remembrance, of invocations and du'as that they do. Right, so they read Yasin, they read different surahs. Right? After that, there's a class. Right? They taught the class with full, right, enthusiasm, and they gave it its rights. It wasn't just, okay, that's enough for today. Early, short class, no, a full class. And then after that, 45 minutes of ishraq. Right? It's voluntary. It's voluntary. It's a miracle to watch. It's a miracle to watch. right? And the istiqamah does not just apply to good deeds. It applies to leaving sins. That 40, 50, 60 years, never looking at anything haram. It's a miracle, right? One of the great, the righteous, I believe, Habib Abdullah bin Hussein bin Tahir, he said that I have never inclined toward a disliked matter, let alone do a haram. My heart never inclined toward it since I was a child, since I became mature. Right? I never even wanted, never even had the thoughts to do something disliked, let alone do something haram. And it's a type of miracle. So, in reality, that is the greatest miracle. It is better than unveilings and doing all these outward different things, which the scholars and the awliya would not even want, because they were afraid that it would change their intentions. They wouldn't want these things. They would shy away from them. And if they happened, they would hide them as much as they could. And what we know of these righteous was mostly what their students narrated after they died, because the teacher would have reprimanded them for narrating while they were alive. Right? Imam al-Junayd, he said that if you see a person who comes to you flying in the air, right, but they don't have istiqamah, don't take from them. If they don't have istiqamah, if they're not upright on the sharia, right, day in and day out, then don't take from them. Right? It's not about miracles to them. So I just wanted to mention, right, why is istiqamah so important? Imam Haddad in his the book of assistance, it's really a precious book to have, and it's very practical, and it's and the way that it would generally be read is to read one chapter at a time, and not to move on to the next chapter until it's applied, until that first chapter is lived. Right? And going through the book of assistance in that way is extremely transformative. Right? It is very practical, but very beneficial. Right? So he mentions here about routines, right? Spiritual routines, which are called awrad. Right? And it's interesting because the word wird, right, is the word that they would use for water, or like the watering hole that everyone would gather at. Right? And these things are seen to be for the soul the same way that water is for the body, that it's nourishing, it quenches that thirst, that need, right? But the soul also has that need. And how many glasses of water do we drink a day? And we're very conscious of how much water we drink, but our soul is thirsty. Right? So these things are seen as, right, that daily quenching of the spiritual thirst, right, and that thirst for a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So the awrad, right, these spiritual routines, the general advice from the scholars, they tell us that we should have a daily portion of every single type of good deed. Every single type of good deed, starting with a very small amount that is one can stay and do, right, and persevere in with steadfastness. Right. So right, many people, they would give 1 coin a day in charity, just consistently. Right. To give, if you were to give, what is it called? A loonie? A loonie, right? That's one, right? If you were to give a loonie every single day, right, for your entire life, it wouldn't be that big of an expense. It's $365 a year, right? But every single day in charity, right? Imagine 40, 50, 60 years, how much your bank account in the next life would be, right? As opposed to a person who gives 1,000 1 year, and then nothing for a while, and then maybe 50 here, and then a 20 here, right? But it's not just about rewards, right? We tend to overlook that small deeds that are consistent have greater reward in the end, right? If the capital wealth, right? If you were to count your capital in the end, right, or your net profit in the end, would be greater than just giving a large sum here and there, right? And anyone who's, right, a working person who's investing in their children's future and saving for college, they'll understand that a little bit every single time goes a long way. But it's not just about the rewards in the end. Right? It's about the transformative effect on the heart. The fact that that action is being done every single day for the sake of Allah. Every single day for the sake of Allah. That they give the example that these good deeds are like drops of water, and no matter how hard the heart is, if the heart is like a stone, right, a drop of water constantly on that stone will penetrate it. Right? It'll penetrate through. However, if you walked outside and you just took a bucket of water, right, how many drops of water is in a bucket? A lot. You just dump it on the rock, it would do nothing. It would do nothing. Right? It would just make the rock wet. Right? So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, right, after making that encouragement to have some sort of daily portion of each act of goodness, right, he says, right, that one's spiritual state, right, being upright, right, depends on a person sticking to that routine. Sticking to the routine. Right? So he says, because every single good deed has a specific effect that it has on the heart. Has a specific effect on the heart, and a specific light, and a specific divine assistance attached to it, and a specific status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, that is not found in another good deed. So you can get spiritually from charity that which you can never get by fasting. And you could get by praying that which you could never get by reading the Quran. And you can get by reading the Quran that which you can never get by performing Hajj, for instance. Right? So to have a small portion of all of them would be better than to have a lot of one and none of the other. Right? But generally, what the scholars would do, that they would have, right, and naturally people's heart inclines toward one good deed over others. Right, so they would have a small portion of all of them, but the one that their hearts inclines toward at that moment, they would increase. So they would have a minimum for all of them, right? And then after that's finished, they would increase on each of whichever one they wish. Right. Allahu Akbar. And Imam Haddad, he actually points out to the fact, right? He quotes Ibn Ata'illah al-Sakandari, right, saying that لما علم الحق منك وجود الملل لون لك الطاعات, that because Allah knows that you're going to get bored, He gave you a whole variety of good deeds to do. Right? How much Quran could you read in a row? Right? How much prayer could you stand and just one after another and just do? Right? For some people it might be easy. For some people it might be like climbing a mountain. Right? Right? So you might get bored from one thing. How many times can you just say, right, subhanallah, 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 subhanallah? You might get bored. Just switch it. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma salli. Right? So, and then he says, know for a fact that these spiritual routines have a huge effect in illuminating the heart, right, and conforming the limbs to the sharia, to the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But, right, and this is, right, a big istidrak. Right? This is a really important point, right, that it's not just about doing it. He says, but that effect will not manifest and it will not be established without two things. Right? Two things are needed in order for the effect of those spiritual routines to really penetrate the heart and to really illuminate the heart, right? And to really manifest on the limbs. He says, one, al-muwadhaba wa takrar, right? Persistence and constant repetition. And this is a big obstacle for us westernized folk, because we grow up in a society that looks down on repetition, right? That things are boring after a while. What's the newest next thing? Right? The way that society is going now is that, right, you might have a phone and a month later there's a new phone, and then people get it, and then a month later there's another one. And you have fast fashion. This clothes are in now, and then 2 weeks later they're right? They're old-fashioned, right? We don't like the same food every day. We don't like to have the same things every day, right? We don't like to watch, right? A person watches, right, a show, they want to switch to another show. They have commercials, right? Commercials are shorter now, right? But they're, even on like a Facebook feed or an Instagram feed, right? You don't want that? Okay, next. They'll give you another one. You don't want that? Next. They'll give you. It's always, right, one after another. And we, because of this, we are accustomed to not being able to stick to routines. We get bored very easily. Right? And part of our refinements, right, this refining ourselves and really, right, working on ourselves day in and day out, part of it is sticking to routines and getting ourselves accustomed to doing the same thing day in and day out, day in and day out, right? While not allowing the heart to be absent in it, right? So to do it day in and day out with just as much sincerity as you did it on the first day. Every single time we pray, that we renew it, we tell ourselves that, look, right, we're about to stand in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to do it with love, not just out of obligation. We're going to do it because we love Allah. We're going to do it because Allah deserves it and we need it, right? So it takes a lot of renewal of intention to do that, to be consistent on things, right? And that's what we have to work on, right? And part of it takes some struggle, it takes some sacrifice, it takes forcing it through the hard times, right? As one of the righteous, Imam Haddad, quotes in the Book of Assistance, he says, كَابَدْتُ قِيَامَ اللَّيْلِ 20 سَنَةً, that I fought patiently with myself to stand for the tahajjud prayer every single night for 20 years. I fought myself. Kabad literally means the liver, right? And that's the expression they would use, right, for toiling and burden. He forced it for 20 years to stick to that routine, And then he said, وَتَنَعَّمْتُ بِهَا 20 سَنَةً آخَرَ, right? And then I delighted in its bliss for the next 20 years after that. So we see that if a person, right, that difficulty in the beginning is لِيَمِيزَ اللَّهُ الْخَبِيثَ مِنَ الطَّيِّبِ, is so that Allah can separate between those who really want it and those who don't. Right? If it had been, right, if first time you made takbir, your soul is in Jannah and seeing everyone would be in prayer. Society would fall. Right? There would be no doctors and no Ubers and no food. People would just be flying in Jannah. Right? But that's not the sunnah of Allah. Right? You may pray and not feel anything. Right? But it's not about what I feel. It's about Allah deserves it. Right? It's not about that. Right? So to focus that this is for you, Allah. I don't want it. I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for you. Right? But the effect is there. And it might be very subtle, but it's most definitely there. Right? And then Allah will switch that burden to absolute bliss. مَا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ وَلَا أُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ وَلَا خَطْرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. Right? That which no eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, and no human mind could ever imagine. Right? So, muwadhaba, consistency, constant repetition. Right? Embracing the routines, embracing boredom, embracing a schedule, right? And sticking to it day in and day out. Right? And the second one, right? Actually he gives three. Right? The second one is to do each individual deed in the same exact time every single day. Now this might be a bit tough, right? And this is why it's very important to have a schedule, right? To do the same exact, right, at the same time every single day you read your Quran. The same time every single day that you do your adhkar, right? And so forth with your fasting. And at the same time every week you do your fasting, or every month. La ilaha illallah. Right? And the other one is, right, the presence of the heart. Right? Imam, in the khulasa, it's a compilation of morning and evening remembrances. He has a quote in the beginning by Imam Haddad that says that doing these awrad, these spiritual routines day in and day out without the presence of the heart, Right? He says, فَنَفْعُهُ قَلِيلٌ, then its benefit is very little, is little in comparison to the person who does it with presence. To read the word latif with focus, right? with contemplation. Right? If you know the Arabic, if not, then just to read it, right? Knowing that it's the prophetic du'as, and right? To read Quran with a present heart, right? To pray with a present heart, day in and day out, right? And they call it the iksir, right? Or the elixir, right? And the idea of alchemy is an ancient idea that the Arabs liked. There's a book called Kimya Sa'ada, right? The alchemist of happiness, the alchemy of happiness. Because alchemy changes things from one state to another. You can change a rock to gold. It's mostly a far-fetched concept that people were always like wondering about, like the what's that thing called? The well of life, or what's it called? The spring of life or something? The fountain of youth. It's kind of like that. It's like this wondrous thing that people would wish to have, right? But these acts of worship are seen as like that alchemy, that they'll take the hardest of the hearts and change it to the most beautiful of hearts. And because these things, day in and day out, they will change that. It's funny that speaking of non-prophetic miracles, like karamat, this one person, he was looking for the fountain of youth, this young kid. Right? So somebody told him that go to so-and-so Shaykh in the mountains, right? Some Bedouin guy, Arab guy who lived in the mountains, right? A rural area by himself, just worshipped Allah. Right? So the kid went to him and said that I want to learn how to change rocks into gold. Right? How to change stones into gold. Right? So the man said, okay, right? I want you to pray with us, right, all 5 prayers in the masjid every single day for the next, right, until I tell you, right, until I tell you when. Right? That's your assignment in order for you to achieve your goal. Right? And the other condition is you have to make wudu from this specific well every time. Right? Every single time you make wudu from this well. Right? So the boy, he actually lived, right, with the Shaykh, and he kind of grew up under his wing, all the hopes of getting this miracle of sorts. So every day in and day out he's praying in jama'ah with the Shaykh. Day in and day out he's sitting in the gatherings of this teacher, of this special person. Day in and day out he's in company with this person, right? Until one day he goes out to make his wudu for Fajr, right? And he pulls up the bucket, all he gets is gold. And he's mad. He dumps it back in. And he pulls up the bucket, no water, just gold. And he dumps it, and he puts the bucket back, and he pulls it up, right? Nothing but gold. And he's upset. He tells the Shaykh, "Ya Shaykh, I just want to make wudu so I can pray Fajr in Jama'ah." Right? His heart doesn't care about the dunya anymore because it has been changed. Even if he got the outward thing that he wanted once in his life, right, it means nothing now. Right? Who cares about a few rocks when you have the King of all kings, the creator of the heavens and the earth? Right, so those 3 things, right? Muwadhaba and takrar, right? Perseverance, steadfastness, and repetition. Right? Doing it in a specific time every single day. Right? And to do every single deed, right, with presence of heart. And it might take, right, it might have to force yourself in the beginning to be present. Right, to fight off distractions, to fight off the thoughts in the mind. Right, whatever you can do ahead of time before starting to clear your mind, right, is best. Right? If you want to, right, finish cooking and then do your Quran, would be better than to have it, right, stove is boiling and you're trying to read. Right, to settle things, whatever you have to do before starting would help, but even during it, it's going to be hard. You have to force your heart to be present. Right? But Imam Haddad, he said that if a person strives to force his heart to be present day in and day out and tries their best, right, that eventually Allah will switch it for them, that presence with Allah will be second nature, and now they have to force themselves to be present with creation. Right? It's opposite now. And he said that, and right, when a person first gets that transformation, that they are with Allah, right, regardless, that many a times they won't be able to be present with creation. They'll fail. They'll try their best to be there, but they'll just, right? And those are different levels that they mention later on. La ilaha Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ya Allah, may Allah illuminate our hearts. May Allah allow Him, the real, to be what is in our hearts and not the fake, which is around us. Right, so there are a few things that will help, because along the way, and we'll close with this, I wanted to just leave some time for questions. Along the way, there will be difficult days. There will be days you don't want to wake up. There will be days that, right, relatives come over. There will be days that you're traveling or you're sick. Right, so the Prophet ﷺ, he has given us certain advices that are important. Right, so Sayyidah Aisha, she narrates that if the Prophet were to sleep, right, and not be able, if a Prophet was busied from not being able to do his spiritual routines of the nights, then he would make it up in the morning the next day before Zawal. And if you do it before the Zawal the next day, it'll be counted as if you did it the night before. So it'll be counted as if you performed it on time. Right? Obviously, right, we should eliminate those things which preoccupy us from our purpose in life to the extent possible. Right? But things happen. Things come up. Right? And if we were not able to do it, right, but one extremely important, if there's anything that we can take away, right, is that Shaitan's main goal is for you to break your resolve. Right? You may leave today with the resolve that I'm going to do, right, 5 pages of Quran every single day, from now until I increase it or I die. Right? You might have that resolve, but a day will come where everything is upside down. Someone is sick, someone's having a baby, in-laws are in town, right? Everything is upside down, right? And you might miss it, or you might not have time to do it. Right? Taking care of your parents might have precedence, so you might not be able to do it. But what Shaitan will try to do is to get you to not repeat it, to not make it up. Right? Because if you don't make it up, now he found his way in. Right? You lost your resolve. Right? So making it up protects the nafs from getting involved and protects from falling into the tricks of Shaitan, because a person, right, they miss their Surah Yasin in the morning, right? And they don't make it up. Right? What's to stop them from missing it the next day? There's no consequence on the nafs. There's no consequence on the nafs. If a person is traveling or sick, the Prophet said that whoever is traveling or sick, then Allah will write for them the same rewards of what they used to do when they were healthy and staying home. Right? So, right, that if one is traveling, right, obviously you might not have the exact time to do your Quran or this or that. Right? Allah knows that. Right? So to an extent, that's an excuse. But to still, on top of that, still do it, right, and make it up, right, it's beloved to Allah. Because that's a sacrifice that you didn't have to do for His sake, but you did. Right? And it protects the nafs from ever getting involved, and there's ever this idea of, oh, I don't have to do it. Right? There's no consequences for me not making it up, so why not? Right? Right? So those two things are really helpful. Last advice is the advice of our teacher, Habib Umar, that if you're sick, right, you already established a minimum of whatever good deed that you want to do. So you have a minimum of Quran, a minimum of recitation, of remembrances or dua, a minimum of voluntary prayers every day. Even if it just be 2 rakats, 1 page, right? 50 la ilaha illallah before you sleep. Right? Whatever it may be, you have a minimum. And you never go below that. Right? You can go above if you want. Right? You have extra time, read some more Quran, no problem. But never below the minimum. Right? Now, if you fall sick, right, then you do half your minimum. You do half your minimum. If you're really sick, right? If you're not that sick, right, just a little bit of a headache, a slight cough, right? Do it, force it. Right? They say, "Siru ilallahi urjan wa makasir." Right? Journey to Allah broken and lame. Right? Even if you're hobbling to the prayer, just continue. The Prophet was dragged to the prayer. right? And he still prayed in Jama'ah. Right? To the extent that you can push it, push it. But if you're really sick and you're really out, right, do half of your minimum. So instead of 5, do 2.5 pages of Quran. Instead of 50 la ilaha, do 25. Right? That way, when you're, right, as you increase, say 20 years later, now you're doing 10 pages of Quran, you're doing 150 la ilaha illallah. Right? Now when you're sick and you cut it to half, right, now your half when you're sick is greater than when you're healthy, when you're in the beginning. Right? So you're doing more now when you're sick than you were healthy when you started. So there's still a progression, right? While giving the body its rights. Right? If you're really out of it, right, then make it up the next day, or make it up when you can. Keep track of it. Right? These things transform the heart, right? And they're called يَخْرُقُ الْحُجُبِ. They rip away the veils of the heart, right, that are distancing us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So we just wanted to cover that. We didn't really have this topic. I just wanted to mention all the things that Imam Haddad said because it's a really important chapter. So we didn't really have a dialogue type of connecting today. But if there's any questions, we could take a couple right now before we stop.
Question. I understand we are encouraged to make up even for our daily dhikr and salawat if we miss it. What if we miss specific sunnah prayers which have allocated timing? Are you allowed to make them up as well?
Yeah. So in regards to sunnah prayers, right, there are only 2 situations in which one can make qada, which is a legal term for making up a prayer, right? Qada for a sunnah. Right? Qada is one of the qualities that's specific to the fard prayer, or the necessary, like the witr. Right? Those you have to make up. Right? But there's only 2 situations where you would make qada of a sunnah prayer, which is if you miss the 2 rakats before fajr, right, and the fajr prayer itself. So you woke up, sun's already risen, right? So you miss the sunnah and the fajr, and if you make it up that day before zawal, right, then you make the sunnahs first and then you make the fard. Right? You make both. If it's after zawal, then you don't make qada of the sunnah, you just make the fard. Right? The second is if you're in the masjid and you're praying dhuhr, right, you're about to pray your sunnahs of dhuhr, but the jama'ah is starting, and so you want to join the jama'ah, right, you can pray the dhuhr sunnahs after the prayer. Right? But if a person misses any other sunnah, technically it's not called qada. It's not called a legal makeup of the prayer, but it is still good to do a similar prayer, right, for the sake of continuing that spiritual benefit and continuing that consistency. But you're not going to call it qada. Right? So if you missed for instance, your 2 rakats after maghrib, right, then later in the night just pray an extra 2 rakats, right? Just for the sake of Allah, just to keep on that same track. Right? And Allah is Kareem. Allah is generous, and Allah will reward according to the sincerity. Right? But technically, legally, it's not called qada. Right, any last questions? Take one more, inshallah. Anyone here have a question? Before we... Okay.
Someone's asking, when does one know that they're ready to add to their word?
Yeah, so whatever you take on in the beginning, right, stick on that until it becomes second nature. And even on the worst of the worst days, you can still do it. Right? If you get to that point, then you can increase, but not a lot. Right? So increase a little bit, and then test it out. Right? If that is fine, then you continue on that. Right? If it's too much, then you might have to adjust. But once you settle that this is enough, you continue on that until until it becomes second nature, and then later on you may increase it. Right? Some scholars, right, give very practical advice that you can set a time period. You can set a time period that say, I'm going to do 5 pages of the Quran, I'm going to try it for 1 year. If I can accomplish that entire year, right, with steadfastness and perseverance, then I'll add an extra page, 6 pages. Not, okay, I did 5, now I'll do a whole juz. No. And that's another, shaitan calls us to all extremes, and the nafs is ready to accept. Right? Extreme laxity and extreme, right, overburdening of ourselves. Right, so add 1 page, add 10 more la ilaha illallah, add, right, an extra $1 of zakat, or of sadaqah, sorry. Right? Add one page of seerah every day. Right? Add only a little bit. And the Prophet said that only take of the actions what you can consistently stick to. Right? And that is most beloved to Allah, and one should not feel that they're missing out. Right? That, oh, so-and-so is doing this much Qur'an every day and I'm only doing few pages. Your few pages is more beloved to Allah, right, than if you were to try to do what they did and then burn out. Right? Just the final advice, the book of Imam Ghazali, The Beginning of Guidance, is a great place to start. It's a great place to start. He already has a type of a schedule, the skeleton of a daily schedule that you could use. You might have to adjust it according to your work and your schooling and everything, but you can start with that as like a template, right? That he talks about the worships that are done before Fajr, after Dhuhr, after Maghrib, after Isha, right? And then you can use that as a template, right? And then schedule your life around it, and then adjust where you can, right? And then apply from there. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with istiqamah, with steadfastness for His sake, and to never allow us to fall into the traps of shaitan, and to give us our resolve. Right? تَنَكَّبَ عَجْزًا عَنْ طَرِيقِ عَزِيمَةٍ وَمَا لَدِي تَأْوِيلٍ ضَعِيفٌ وَرُخْصَةٍ. Imam Haddad, he says that they have gone off the path of true resolve. Right? تَنَكَّبَ عَجْزًا, out of, right, deeming themselves incapable. عن طريق عزيمة ومال لتأويل ضعيف ورخصة, and they inclined toward weak interpretations and taking concessions. Oh, you know what, it's not fard today, right? Oh, you know what, there's no qada of the sunnah. Oh, you know what, I'm traveling, so technically, مال لتأويل ضعيف ورخصة, that he inclines toward weak interpretations, excuses, right? وَرُخْصَةِ, and concessions, using the sharia to justify the making of excuses. Right? So we ask Allah to save us from that, and if we do fall, to allow us the strength to renew our resolve and our intentions, and to strive again, for us to, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take us by the hand and to do it for us, because, right, He is فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ, He is the doer of what He wishes, and we ask Allah to make us amongst those who He intends to reach, and those who He intends to be purified, and who He intends to be saved in this life and the next, and who He intends to be close to His Prophet ﷺ, right, outwardly and inwardly, in speech and in action and character, until we meet at the pond of the Prophet ﷺ and drink from his hands and enter into Firdaus al-A'la with him. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullahu khair.